Hello and welcome to the Grow Places podcast, where we explore the virtuous circle of people, growth and place. Brought to you by Grow Places and hosted by our founder, Tom Larsson.
Gerry, thank you very much for joining me today on the Grow Places podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's a privilege to have you on. How's things?
Things are very good.
Good.
Enjoying life.
Yeah.
Yes.
You were just saying to me off mic, you're pretty busy, so it would be great to start with what you're up to now, really.
Yeah, sure. So about 3 years ago, I guess I stepped out of let's call it the corporate world, where I'd spent most of my professional career to do my own thing as Gerry Hughes Consulting. A very novel name, but I guess I felt I had done my time in the corporate world and wanted to get free of that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but free of that to do what I wanted to do, sort of this last stage of my career. So I set my little business up, which will just be me. I have a load of other associates that work in other businesses, but I wanted to work on things that I wanted to work on, that I felt genuinely would make a difference. And that's a bit of a high bar in some ways, but it's actually, through my experience, do things differently, have an impact, and again, two other things: work with people I like working with who share the same values, and have some fun doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how does that manifest itself in my work? I am doing a number of things, really fall into three buckets, maybe four actually. Firstly, I'm leading a couple of very big projects, one in my home city of Belfast, one and that's a regeneration project, which I'll probably come back to in a few moments. Secondly, I'm leading a big nuclear science development project in Bristol way. I find myself in that project lead role, which I actually like, coordinating the input of different disciplines and navigating a project through, the process that's quite involved and complex. Secondly, I've got a couple of non-exec director positions. One is with a company called Place Capital with David Smith-Milne, and where that business is focused on delivering housing, particularly affordable housing. I'm also a non-exec director on Maritime Belfast, which again takes me back to my home city, which is a charitable foundation responsible for protecting the heritage of the waterfront in Belfast. And then I'm doing a number of other smaller consultancy assignments, working with partners, and then the fourth thing is, when I get the opportunity and time, mentoring the next generation of people, helping them through some of the obstacles, hurdles, issues that they face as they develop their career. I really like doing that when I find the time.
Yeah, amazing. It's amazing, and I'd love to go back into sort of how you've got to where you are, but maybe just staying here at the moment. Then, so what do you think? If you were to digest all of that experience down into what you're doing now, you said you want to make a difference. What do you really feel like your particular version of making a difference is?
That's a good question. Delivery. And I mean, my training and the way I think is very strategic. So I'm a strategic thinker. I tend to look at the big picture. I tend to be able to navigate the complex interplay of issues in urban regeneration and urban development quite well, because I understand how the various disciplines interrelate. I'm pretty good at that, I think, and that's how I built my career. But the one thing that I gradually got more engaged with was, how do you actually make these projects happen in reality without losing the inherent vision that you have at the start of a project. So delivery in this country is really difficult. It's really difficult often because we make it difficult, candidly. We have a tremendous amount of bureaucracy and process that is self-generated. A lot of it's necessary, a lot of it's not necessary. So I think what I'm trying to do, certainly in the two projects I'm leading on, one, the project in Belfast, the Regeneration project, and the other, the nuclear science project, I'm trying to find a way where I can navigate those projects through a process as quickly and as effectively as possible. So that experience I've had of understanding how the process works, how the various disciplines come together in a creative way, and then how to navigate through planning, through funding, financing, through public engagement, all the steps you have to take to get a project onto the ground. I think that's where I think I can make a difference, and that's where I'm focusing on delivery.
Yeah, totally, and yeah, exactly. And your experience is totally unique in doing that, and you've touched on it's multifaceted, isn't it? Any delivery, yes. and as you say, we make projects complicated. They are complicated by nature because it's people and places, and it's everything that goes into life essentially, isn't it? But yes. there's a lot we do in this country probably as well to make it more complicated. So do you have a kind of a method of working through that? Do you think because you, in your experience, you do have a unique perspective really. You've worked at different levels of sort of, as you say, on the ground delivery, project management almost, up to policy and strategic land, and so do you see there's a sort of method to that?
The first, I don't think there's a method, but there's probably a series of techniques that I tend to deploy. First of all is understanding what we want to achieve and trying to get everyone on the same page as quickly as possible on that. And then within the team, and invariably it is a team game, isn't it, Regeneration? Plotting out the process to get from A to B as quickly as possible, and ensure everyone understands that, and trying to identify where those hurdles might arise. And then so that's the first thing. The second thing I think then is a combination of challenge and encouragement.
Yeah.
A positive encouragement. Challenge, do we really need to do that? Do you think that's absolutely necessary? Can we push back on that? Why are we doing that way? Is it really essential that we do that way? Because what I find is and this is a little bit of a bugbear of mine, is that the bureaucracy is mutually reinforcing. And what I mean by that is that there's a process we've got to go through to navigate planning, to get the approvals and licenses that we need to do development. And there are questions that come back, and there are challenges that come back from the public sector invariably. But quite often that triggers a response of compliance on our side. So the consultant in question will simply, okay, that's okay, and go away and do more work at more cost, without challenging, is that really necessary? Do we have to do that? Can we not do it this way without incurring yet another roll of the dice in terms of work and analysis? I find that dance happens in every project. So it's a mutually reinforcing process where the process of getting planning, we think about getting planning now particularly, just takes longer and longer and longer. So challenge and encouragement that we should be challenging.
Yeah, totally. And if you were to look at the real estate development industry, maybe specifically this country, as an outsider, and you worked in technology or something like that, you might go, okay, well, this is all too fragmented. We just need to vertically integrate, or we need to do, big off-site manufacturing programs, or and there's these kind of silver bullets maybe that are going to kind of cut through a lot of this. Now we know that that's not the case.
No.
It's very, very difficult to do these things. They're multifaceted, as we say. But do you think there are other things that we could learn from other areas of industry, other places that you've come across in your career that you think we could help oil the wheels a little bit?
I don't know the answer to that directly, but I think maybe I'll ask it slightly differently. I think one of the issues with the real estate sector is we've become incredibly siloed. An office agent lets offices. A building surveyor does building surveys. Rating, a surveyor does rating. A planning consultant gets planning permission, and it's not like that in the real world. It's a much more complex interplay of all of those things, and each one of those skill sets have a role to play in creating successful places, which is ultimately what we're about. Real estate's about creating successful places, both in the short term, medium term, and long term. People create value, so you've got to create a place that actually is attractive to people who want to live there, work there, take leisure there, those people will generate demand, generate value. That's what we're about, isn't it? It's all about creating value. And we get it right, you're creating great places at the same time. The two are mutually interrelated. So what we have lost over, over, I think, the last 20 years in this country is we have fewer and fewer people who are able to think strategically, who can join the dots across all of those different elements and coordinate that process. And that's, you know, if I was to go back into education, or if I was to go back into any forum where I could actually encourage a different way of working, would be I would want to try and encourage people who are able to think strategically about the big issues, understand, you know, the technical challenges and issues without being deeply ingrained in them, but stand back and understand how that element interplays with that. So I think real estate has somehow lost, maybe it never had it, but in my career, there's fewer and fewer people who are able to think strategically about the big issues.
Yeah, and I think that's a public and private thing, isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Everything gets broken down into its component element without seeing how that fits into a bigger picture.
Yeah. And you may sort of bandage this all up in one thing, but sort of ability to take decisions and leadership, kind of the strategic thinking, isn't there? But then there's action that kind of goes with that. And I think often, rightly so, you know, things aren't black and white. Absolutely, you know, whether it's a policy or whether it's a kind of an outcome or a metric, and within that you need an element of judgment, don't you? That's partly experience, it's partly strategic thinking, it's partly teamwork.
Yes.
But it does require, you know, taking decisions, and that's obviously the role that you're occupying as a project director, and you know, previously as a CEO. Or, but how do you see that in this lens of, you know, you're wanting to get things delivered? Maybe how we take decisions, whether individually or collectively, to actually deliver some of these things.
Leadership's, you know, it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? But leadership's everything. And the successful cities, emerging like Manchester, you know, they've had amazing leadership over a long period of time. Sir Howard Bernstein, sadly no longer with us, but you know, imbued an approach as a leader with his political leaders, you know, about how you actually make change happen, and that is carrying forward. So, you know, to cut through all of those issues, whether you're in the private sector or whether you're working in the public sector, or whether you're working on a project that's a combination of both, which projects invariably will be, the key thing, I think one of the key things is having a leadership that actually has the ability to get people working together, keep their eye on the goal or the vision, enable people to make their own decisions. You know, leadership's not about making every decision, as we know. That is moving the project in the right direction. And I think we have a lack of leadership in many instances. Some of our cities, without naming any names, I think we could do with a few more Howard Bernsteins, for example, to drive their economies forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And so maybe staying on this theme then of sort of leadership, strategy, delivery, and now looking back then over your career, whether it's a project or a place or a culture, a working environment, has anything kind of come to mind where you're like, you've mentioned Howard Bernstein, but are there any other examples for you over that period of time where you're like, God, you know, this was really rolling here. We had something really going.
There are two examples. First is a company I work with. My very first job as a consultant after I left, I did some work at the University of Belfast, or Queen's University Belfast, post graduation. But then my first proper job was with a company called Building Design Partnership, BDP as they became known, and working with them as an multidisciplinary organisation really influenced me in terms of how those different disciplines can be brought to bear on a project, and they did that really, really well. But the thing that stuck with me from the people I was reporting to at the time, Roy Adams was a name you may not know, but he became the chief executive of BDP, and he was my boss initially. Was that role of the ringmaster, the coordinator, the person who sits at the centre of all of those different inputs and basically calls the shots or directs and influences that. So that was a very important point for me to see, the importance of that role, and that's where I set myself out to always be the ringmaster, always be the person who's at the centre of the whole process, and I successfully achieved that in many instances. That's the first thing. The second, that was very influential. I think the second thing was, I will go back to Manchester again because it was formative for me, and it was working with Howard. It's a project though. It was the East Manchester project, East Manchester Regeneration project, where I, in partnership with Joe Berridge of Urban Strategies in Toronto, we led the regeneration framework for East Manchester, which was one of the first urban regeneration companies that was spearheading the regeneration of that whole part of the city. And for the first time, genuinely, we set about preparing a 360-degree strategy which addressed not just the physical, but thought about the economics, thought about the people, thought about the social aspects of what we're trying to achieve, addressed issues like local education, et cetera, the environment. Genuinely a 360-degree urban regeneration framework that stands the test of time in my view. Today the things that Urban Splash have delivered, the delivery of the Manchester City complex, it's all goes back to that framework, and the power of having people working together, strong civic leadership, that stuck with me, and I'm very proud of that.
No, amazing. And so we can actually sometimes talk about, can't we, like these, whether it's these frameworks, 360 strategies in the abstract, and I know you've talked to me before about like people and places, what does it kind of actually mean, like what are we actually talking about here? Maybe with that example, can you think back, because obviously you've been fortunate enough now to see that from kind of on the drawing board through concept to actually being delivered, people living there, and you've got that sort of feedback loop, however you want to describe that. What does it actually mean then, do you think, for people and place in this context, what we're actually talking about?
It's not perfect news, Manchester. We could another time talk about where it's not quite worked, and I think learning those lessons is important. But your question, that's place and people. It's an interrelationship. People make places, places make people. And in fact, just a sidebar, when I became the chief executive of GVA, this was at the heart of my philosophy, and we created a purpose. We evolved a purpose with a partnership that was focused on people and place. And in fact, we developed I don't like the phrase strapline, but we crystallized it into a term, our places build people. It was just, and it was essentially an attempt to corral, if that's the right word, the entire panoply of real estate services under a single purpose. And if you can get that right, that's powerful. I think we were the first. All the real estate advisory firms now talk about people in place, don't they? But I think we were the first. I candidly think we were the first to really put a step into that. It was not something the real estate advisory world did. In New East Manchester, to use that example, you have seen how the regeneration effect, where you have really successful places which are, if you go to the northern quarter now, which is on the edge of the city centre, and the western edge of New East Manchester, you go to Ancoats, you can see the vitality that exists by people living there, occupying those very important historical buildings. And there's always a tension between history or preservation and new build, as we know. I think the one thing that they've done really well there is they've got that balance correct, new build and keeping. And so the vitality is there. People have a sense of ownership of the place. They feel safe, secure. They're living there. There's a new school there that Urban Splash delivered on the canal side. And it's taking, I think what they need to do in East Manchester is start to take that and gradually move it eastwards from the city centre, and that's the next steps, I think.
Yeah. So would you say that that's kind of a really good example of where you have genuinely kind of impacted on the lives of the people there, and maybe sort of bringing that forward to what you're doing with Place Capital Group then, because that, it's housing, isn't it? It's about It's about the everyday. It's about kind of affordable housing, which is really challenging it's really challenging to deliver, frankly, on multiple levels. Maybe you could sort of touch on that and how you think you're navigating through that.
Such a big topic and a big challenge for, in fact, most European cities have this issue, but the UK, it's a phenomenal challenge. I think, and I'm seeing this firsthand with the work that we're doing at Place Capital, how challenging it is to get development going, and we're set up to deliver houses. That's what we want to do. That's, if we're not delivering houses, we don't have a business. And I thought about this before I came to this meeting. Actually, there's been so much work done on how do we unlock more housing, and I think there are a number of things that I think need to be done. And I'm going to start with my own discipline, the planning system. And equally, there's been myriad of reports about how we improve the planning system. The planning system is fundamentally a problem. It's not about ticking around with the edges and making a few changes here. We've got a whole industry, public and private, set up by a relatively artificial construct that we have to navigate. There's a whole industry around planning. I would be an advocate for a European approach, which is a more zonal approach, where there's deemed permission once you've got a zone applied, and you cut through a lot of the, don't get me wrong, you've got to deal with the environmental and sustainability issues and other engineering related issues, but the principle of use and planning, if you can actually, I would really start again. I know that's a big challenge to any government, but our system is fundamentally a problem, and adds months, years to process. Segue, my nuclear science project in Stroud, just north of Bristol, is the redevelopment of the former research and development complex of the Magnox reactor program. So the use is established. We're bringing it up to the 21st century. Science and Technology Park, focus on nuclear and clean energy. Okay, we're trebling the size of the development. It will have taken us at least 18 months to get plan permission. The uses are the same, and it will have cost us 1.5 million to get plan permission. I mean, that's just crazy, totally crazy. I'm just that example. So the first thing is planning has to be resolved. Second, we have to take away the delivery of social housing from, the private sector. Largely, I know Place Capital is a private sector company, and we'll be delivering social and affordable housing as part of our programme. But we've got to liberate the public sector to deliver social housing. There are many good examples of where this is done elsewhere in Europe, but that was the biggest mistake we've ever made, was actually cut back council housing. We need to have more public sector housing for people who are in need. Thirdly, we need to get more small builders into the market, and if you make planning easier, cut that cost out, you will see more people come into the market to develop. Fourthly, you've got to get public land into play more quickly. We're seeing that at Place Capital, how difficult it is to get a public sector site into play. Even when you own the site next door, you have to go through a whole process of getting approval, maybe you can go through procurement, justifying best value. I'm not saying those things are important, but we've got to streamline that process. And I think that's it. There's those 4 or 5 things would make a fundamental difference. It's not easy, but unless we tackle it at that level, nothing's going to change.
Yeah, no, honestly, Gerry, there's so many things, so many different ways I could take this conversation and talk to you about, because there's, you in one breath we're talking about, the work you'll do with nuclear power plants, and the other is affordable housing, and that's what makes your experience in this conversation
Yeah.
like so interesting. Just sticking on the housing point for a second, you know, where do you think you've mentioned planning, which is part of it, and some of the other factors there, but what else can actually be done by operators within the system? Let's call it that. So, you know, the likes of Grow Places, the likes of Place Capital Group, who are operating within a system. You know, the system itself probably, as you've mentioned, needs to change. But are there any actual practical steps that businesses can take, do you think, within the system to actually operate at the moment? Because as you say, if there's no homes being built, then, you know, no one's winning really, are they?
We have, you know, we have a pipeline at Place Capital of at least 5,000 homes, right, in our pipeline, in terms of opportunities, sites, whatever. And this is a conversation you should have with David. You should really have David on.
Yeah, I would like to have David on. It'd be good.
On,
I should
on,
do. Yeah.
On this podcast, because he's genuinely brilliant.
Yeah.
I don't actually know a practical response to that. You know, I've talked about the big things that need to happen. David's more day to day on unlocking projects, and he's deeply frustrated by the process, as he'll tell you if you get him on here. I think we work at getting, the starting point is getting control of sites and opportunity, and you know, I think the public sector has got a big role to play in that, and forming relationships with local government or local authorities in a way that allows them to effectively bring sites into play. You know, even to deliver against our massive homelessness challenge, the temporary accommodation issues every city's grappling with. You know, we would work with any local authority who have sites, who have the ability to help solve that problem. We would work with them to bring those sites into play, to deliver short-term temporary accommodation to meet this challenge. And the issue is just getting the leadership at the local authorities in many instances to see there's a nervousness about engaging with the private sector without going through some sort of really convoluted process. So I haven't answered your question because I don't actually know, but I think getting control of sites allows us to then, we can navigate the planning process once we have control of the sites.
Yeah. No, I think you kind of have, and I'd like to get David on as well. But as you say, in that answer, it shows how difficult it is, really, doesn't it, as well?
Yes.
Because as any entity within the supply chain, it's incredibly difficult, I think, at the moment, to be bringing forward houses, which is, you know, what we need a huge amount of, and the right type of housing as well. So
well, it makes, you know, and my, you know, I wanted to maybe talk about my project in Belfast, which is right in the city centre, which is for the first time, Belfast as a city is going through, you know, the start of a renaissance. It's an exciting time to go back to that city again, because it's, you know, the troubles we've had, and, you know, for a number of other economic reasons, it's, you know, it hasn't gone through the massive change that maybe some other UK cities have. So it's at the start of a process. You can see the green shoots of something happening, and it makes it an exciting time. The project it was previously known as Tribeca, so it's no longer known as Tribeca. It's right in the city centre. You know, it's a few hundred metres from the city hall, and with client Castlebrook, who own the entire block, shall we say, we will deliver about 1,000 new homes and about 100,000 square foot of active ground floor use. And it's genuinely exciting to be working, and that will be a mix of residential accommodation. It will be, you know, some flex living or co-living in there. It'll be built to rent, outright sale, social co-ownership. So the intention is to create a neighbourhood, really, for the first time right in the city centre. Genuinely, that's not happened before. So we're breaking new ground there. But the approach we're taking is to start with, put people first. You know, think about what people want in this part of the city. Start with the streetscape, the public spaces, the ground plane, the architecture will come later. We have got, I think it's 5 listed buildings in the block, and we're in 2 conservation areas, so you can imagine the challenge we have between new build and preservation. So we're navigating that through that. We brought a local team together. We brought Oliver Schulze from Schulze Grashof in from Copenhagen, so that brings that sort of Copenhagen influence to focus on the master planning, get the streetscape right. We are really excited about that project, breaking new ground in Belfast and helping sort of catapult the Renaissance forward in that city. The issues are myriad, dealing with conservation, preservation, as you might imagine. Political leadership, the political landscape is very complex in Belfast, but our approach is to work in partnership as much as we can. Even though we control the land, we see delivery being about partnership. We have to work together to make this happen. So it's an exciting project to be involved with, and I think it's almost like a test case for some of the things we've talked about. How do you make places that really will stand the test of time, that will be successful, that will be attractive to people, that will be part of a wider regeneration process for the city of Belfast.
Yeah, amazing. And what does it mean to you personally, this project? Your city and having influence on it in that way.
Yeah, a lot. That's where I started my career. I went to university in Belfast. My very first ever project was working with BDP on the master plan for the Lagenside Development Corporation. So it gives away my age, I guess, if you look that up. But that was my first project. Now back in the city, working on a major regeneration project right in the city centre, and also being on the board of Maritime Belfast. So yeah, I'm very fortunate to be able to go back and do a project or 2 major projects in my home city.
Yeah. And what do you think of the city now compared to when you were growing up? Because I think often we have like a recency bias, however you want to put it, about the state of places today and life today, and actually when you think back to where things have kind of come from and to, it can be a much more kind of optimistic, positive story. So do you feel like obviously Belfast is a particular example of that as a city? How do you feel about it as a place now? What does it feel like to be there, and how do you feel like that's kind of evolved over time, really?
I think it's been an amazing journey as a city. It's unique as a city. It's politically unique, and we've got to bear that in mind. It's also unique in terms of location. It's a bit of an outlier in the UK, and it's a little bit schizophrenic. Is it part of Britain? Is it part of Ireland? And you've got all of that going on. But as a city, it's an amazing city. It's got such a deep history. The people are amazing. They've got a phenomenally strong work ethic, very straightforward, great sense of fun as a city. And since I went to university there, the change has been profound, but still you can see how much has to happen. Obviously peace has come. The waterfront is finding a new life. As industry moves back, shipbuilding moves further away. Still happens in the city, freeing up much of the waterfront for development. Some development has happened on the east side of the river. There's opportunity for a lot more. You can see the Renaissance in the city centre. We're on the cusp of, as I've just said, people coming to live in the city centre, which would have been unheard of. It's just unheard of. You wouldn't have contemplated the fact that people would be thinking about living in apartments in the city centre, no car. We'll have no car parking on our scheme. That would be unheard of. So that journey has been phenomenal, and I think it finds itself. The final thing I'll say on this, you can tell I'm quite passionate about this. The whole Brexit issue has created a phenomenal opportunity for Belfast, because it's got a foot in both camps, effectively. Part of the UK, and it's also, still in some way has a foot in the European Union. And if it can actually harness that, that juxtaplacement, it can be very powerful economically, and I can see that starting to happen.
Yeah, totally.
And also a very strong university at Queen's University Belfast, which is important, and the University of Ulster, who's now moved their campus into the city centre.
Yeah, amazing. And you've touched on there sort of all of the various sort of factors that play into a success of a place that beyond financial, aren't they? You know,
Yes.
there's a huge amount in all of that, which is nothing really to do with the financial aspects of the place, but that sort of underlying sense of viability is super important, isn't it? And I can imagine Belfast, it's been front and centre over the past few decades, and in the UK we've touched on housing. You know, it's ever present now, isn't it? About how do we actually go back to your point about delivery, this viability point. So maybe like your role, I'm thinking particularly maybe of your time at GVA, you know, when you were advising numerous clients, strategic land, all the way through to public and private partnerships. What do you think we could do around viability to move projects forwards, to make things happen that aren't necessarily systems change, but are kind of, you know, things that we can do sort of day to day for anyone listening who's like, okay, how do I kind of move this forwards?
Share risk across public and private more. You know, the type of projects we're talking about, which are city centre or city regeneration projects, invariably require the public and the private working together in some form. It can be very formalised in terms of a joint venture structure. It can be less formal in terms of a more informal partnership, and there's a whole myriad of different forms of partnership. But you have to find the right model for the particular set of circumstances. But it's all about the two working together and sharing risk, in my view, to address the issue of viability. All our northern cities, particularly northern cities, and even London now, have viability challenges for a number of reasons, as costs have gone up and sort of values have stagnated, as we know. So working in partnership to navigate those and mitigate those risks is really, really important. And the two components, understanding where each is coming from. You know, there's an inherent mistrust of the private sector and the public sector side, and that's a bit of a cliche, but it just does exist politically. And equally, there's on the private sector side, there's this view that the public sector is full of bureaucracy, and that's, you know, pain on the backside. And how do we circumvent that, rather than how do we get alongside and make that more easy? So I think the two working together, finding ways of working together. And how does that work in my head? You know, I think shared vision. You know, I can't emphasize enough getting the shared but I don't mean the high level thing. It's more about, well, okay, what does that vision mean in reality? And we're all bought into that. You know, the objectives that really make that vision achievable. And then working out, well, I'm thinking from the public sector point of view, well, who is the best partner? Because not all private sector partners are equal. So there is horses for courses. I have seen procurement processes where at the final two you've ended up with one an apple and one a pear, and you go, there's something not quite right about that. Really, you know, those you should end up with a partner or two partners if it's pure who are equally capable of a similar approach to dealing with this particular opportunity. So finding the right partner. I think also I think flexibility is the other word I'd use in terms of working together. If you are creating some sort of structure to tackle delivery, enable delivery, tackle risk, circumstances change. You know, if the partnership is wound too tight in whatever way, that can't adjust to the change in circumstances. Some of these projects are 10 plus years. Then it's going to fail at some point. That tension is going to break it, and I've seen that happen where it's been legally too tightly wound up that you can't actually flex. And so that ability to adapt and change. And then finally, it's where I started this conversation. You have to have someone in the driving seat or in the ringmaster role who actually can navigate through those issues. You know, they can say, well, okay, they build confidence. Actually, it's nothing. You can build confidence that this will be, and take that longer term perspective, navigate the short term, and lead the process rather than just react to. Or lead from a point of view of understanding what the obstacles are likely to be and finding ways over them and on to the next stage. So
Yeah, totally.
So that brings it back to where I started, I guess.
Yeah, totally. And I think just maybe to wrap up then, what has been a fascinating and really, really broad-ranging conversation. What in that mindset then? What makes you? Do you feel optimistic about where we are, where we're going, what we're trying to do within the planning regeneration space, however you want to describe it?
You've always got to be. You've always got to be optimistic, don't you? There are times you go, but I think, I love working with people, and I love working with different disciplines, and you get if you can capture the energy you see, day to day in meetings or people trying to do the right thing, and harness that and find a way of navigating the issues that we're facing. Yes, I'm optimistic. I think the fact that there's government, we're devolving more power to the cities is a good thing. That makes me optimistic, that because the cities are the drivers of our economy, right? So let the cities work out and let the cities drive it forward. If we can find the leadership to take that responsibility and make the change happen that's necessary, that gives me sense for optimism. I think I would love us to be able to deliver infrastructure much more quickly and more effectively. It's deeply frustrating the way we go about delivering infrastructure, because infrastructure is to me it's the lifeblood of economic growth. If you want to deliver more housing more quickly, I should have said this, get the infrastructure right. If you want people to come and live somewhere, and to make it more viable, make sure it's well connected into the rest of the network. So infrastructure is critical, but we are not good at delivering infrastructure in this country. So we have to find a way of making that better. So overall, I'm optimistic, because if you look back over time, there's always been times when there's reason to be pessimistic, but we always work out, don't we? And we get there. It's just this time, I think it's taking a bit longer, isn't it?
Gerry, thank you very much for your time today.
Pleasure, I've enjoyed it.
It's been a fascinating conversation, far-ranging and really, really insightful, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Grow Places podcast. For more information, visit growplaces.com and follow us at We Grow Places across all social channels. See you next time.